Hey, this is Tom, Junkie XL. Welcome to Studio Time with Junkie XL. We're going to talk today about modular synthesis, and this is going to be an introductory course to modular synthesis. So, let me walk you through here this wall. Do you actually need everything like this? No, you don't. Is it fun? Definitely. So, the point now is, what do you actually need to build a very simple modular patch? First off, you need an oscillator that makes a sound. Potentially you need a filter to filter the sound down or up. You need to give the oscillator a pitch information so it knows what key it needs to play or what note it needs to play. You need a trigger info so the gate of the ADSR knows when to trigger the gate, so you actually hear a note, and then for the duration of the note and when it's being released. So a few models you need. So let's go to the wall and let's pick something that is an oscillator. So let's pick this one right here. This oscillator is the Cobol oscillator. It's made by a company called Modular. It's in France, amazing company, make really great stuff. So here we have a mixer made by STG, also a very great company, and this is going straight into Cubase. So anything that I stick into this mixer will end up, over there. So let's just see if we have sound to begin with. Here we go. So now we have the oscillator hooked up with like a very simple note, and I can tune it down. And I can tune it up. Let's say we want to program a bass sound like fairly low. Around there. So how am I going to know at this point what the pitch of this is? Because this is completely free. Including all the quarter notes and everything in between. So therefore I have a very simple Korg guitar tuner hooked up, and I take this cable out of the mixer and I stick it in here, and this is connected to the tuner, and now we can actually see what note it is. So it's a little over a C, but it's a little sharp, so I'm just going to give this thing a very little wiggle until it reads perfectly in the middle. That's good enough for now. And we go back into the mixer. So now we have a C. So I'm trying not to touch this frequency button anymore, because if I do, it's going to detune and I have to go through the whole process again. So what is a really interesting feature of this particular module is that it has multiple different waveforms, which is normal for every oscillator, but I can gradually switch between these. It gets a saw wave, it turns into a pulse wave, into a very small pulse wave. So that's the typical characteristic of this oscillator. Let's now go to a different oscillator. Let's go, for instance, to this oscillator, which is made by synthesizers.com. Also a really great company, make really great stuff. And if we look here, we see something similar as on the other module. We see the frequency, but here we see range. So with this, I can switch from high to low. And where it says low, it means that now the waveform is so slow that it's almost not hearable anymore for us, and it turns into an LFO. So now you could use the oscillator actually to modulate something else. In this particular oscillator, on the contrary to the Cobol oscillator, we see here the individual outputs of the waveforms. So there's no morphing in between, it's just a hard out. And many oscillators in the modular world will spit out multiple waveforms at the same time, which is actually super handy. So here we hear a sinus wave. It's a triangle. That's the saw. It's the ramp. And that is the pulse. Now the pulse does have a width, so that we can change. Now let's tune this oscillator too. It almost sounds like a C, I have to be honest, but let's just check. Yeah, it is a C, but it's a little bit high. So I'm just going to give it a little wiggle. Yep, fine for me. So let's now put this back into our mixer. As you probably can hear, I have 2 channels going into Cubase stereo, between brackets. But obviously you see only 1 cable coming out of here. This whole thing is mono. So you hear it only on one side of your speaker or on one side of your headset. So I'm just going to change that really quickly. So I'm going to use 2 short cables, and I'm going to plug this output of the oscillator into something that's called a multiple. And the multiple has an input, and it has 4 outputs. And these 4 outputs are a copy of whatever goes in there. And you can use it for many different reasons. So you could use it to split an audio signal or a control voltage. It can be anything. So now I'm going to take one of these outputs, stick it in here. So now we have signal on the side that we had before. And now I'm sticking the second cable into my right channel. And now we have signal on both channels. And since I'm going to do some more processing on this particular audio signal, I'm actually going to stick this output signal into a third mixer and then stick the output of that third mixer into the input of this multiple. So I have control over that signal just with one specific knob, just like that, instead of like doing 2 knobs. And I can add more signals, obviously, to this chain. So, just going to set this in the middle. Okay, here we go. So at this point, we just have this pulse wave with nothing on it. It's just that single signal. So what can we now do with that oscillator that's going to make this sound a little more exciting than this? For starters, we could put an LFO, what I just described, onto the pulse width, so we get this nice chorusy effect of the pulse just moving around. But obviously I'm not going to stand here all day turning that knob, so I want something that is going to do that for me. So take a small cable, and the oscillator right next to it is exactly the same as this one, but I'm going to switch this one now to low, and I set the frequency like very low, and you see the light very slowly coming on and coming off, which means that it's a very slow LFO. And I'm taking the sine wave out and stick it into the pulse width modulation. But it's not doing anything at this point because I have to add some voltage to that knob. And now we hear that it's moving by itself, and I don't need to stand here all day doing this. So we could make the speed higher. If I take it out, it disappears. Let's now try a different waveform. If we use the saw waveform, you will see a very interesting effect that's happening. So instead of the smooth sine wave, we actually hear almost like a sort of an attack. Let's try the pulse. That's interesting too. what would happen if I would stick a frequency in there that is exactly the same as the one it's spitting out? Let's see what happens with that. So let's now take a third oscillator, which is going to keep this one for fun, like as an LFO, which is, we're not going to touch this. And now I'm taking a different cable, and I'm going to stick it in the tuner. These synthesizer.com oscillators are usually very easy to tune. You can almost do it on site. So I set this perfectly in the middle. I go to that knob, and let's just see if this is a C. This is a high B, so we're very close to the C, and there it is. Boom. Happy. So, take this cable back out. I take this cable. So now we take the output of this oscillator, which is technically sounding exactly the same as our original oscillator. Exactly the same. But now if I take an output, let's say the sine wave, and I stick it into our pulse width modulation socket, and I add it to it, that's an interesting sound. Let's make that an octave higher. That's interesting. Interesting. That's a pretty interesting sound. So, what if I wanted to automate this? Okay, to automate this, to make this signal, because this is already an oscillator, to make this go quiet and then up and quiet and up, that's when I need, let's look over here. That's when we need a VCA, which is a voltage controlled amplifier. So I take this signal out that we just grabbed. I'm going to stick it in here. This is an octolinear VCA. So it has basically 8 of them. Synthetic Sound Labs makes this, also a really great company. I have to be honest, I'm bluntly advertising for all these modules because these are super small companies. Don't think of this as major corporations. These are like 2-3 guys in a garage that are making these modules. I'm exaggerating, but I have so much love for the people that make this that I'm bluntly going to advertise everything you see in this rack. And then the output of the VCA is now going back into our pulse width modulation. And now I'm going to add an LFO to the control voltage that will then take the signal of our modulating oscillator and just make it do like this. So I'm going to use another oscillator. Let's pick this one over here. Set it to low, like we did before, so it turns into an LFO. Take its output and stick it in the control voltage input. Now, let's see if that worked. And it works. So now I don't need to stand there all day and doing that thing. I could change the speed of this. Okay, so let's say I wanted to give this more rhythm. So instead of using an LFO, what if I used a rhythm to do that? So there are a couple of ways of doing that. I can take, so let's just take this thing out. So now I'm going to add an ADSR. And an ADSR stands for attack, decay, release, sustain. So let's take an output of that, this one, into that. I can take this one, because now I can give it a wiggle. So let's put our sound back on. So now our control voltage for the VCA that is controlling the modulating oscillator to our sound is going to now be controlled by an ADSR. Okay, this is great, but now I need to stand here all day to switch this on and off. And therefore, I want to use a sequencer that is going to give a little spike to that input gate, so it does that for me. Therefore, I have to walk to my rig for a split second to switch on Cubase. And I'll explain later what I'm doing here. But basically, the way that I have it set up in my studio is that I can actually press play in Cubase, and now we see the lights of the modular rig are running. And why is that? Because Cubase is spitting out MIDI information and a clock information to this rig. So if we look over here, we see a couple of MIDI interfaces that are built into this rig. These are MIDI interfaces built by synthesizer.com. And as we can see here, it's now receiving timing info from Cubase that is going to determine what the tempo is. So this makes it possible for me that if I have a piece of music with a certain tempo, that I can basically make something with the modular synth that is then in sync with the tempo in Cubase. So, and what is a trigger sequencer? If we come over here and we look at this beautiful box here, this is made by a company called Moon from Germany, a magnificent company, really, really amazing designer. So now we see all these red buttons. Let's switch all these lights off of the top row. As you see, this is like a 32-step trigger sequencer. So now nothing is happening. So if I do this, and I do that, and I do this, and I do that, we have a trigger, boom, we have another trigger, boom, we have another trigger, and boom, we have another trigger. So, where we left off the last time when we were working here, is that we have a gate that is now controlling our modulation source. That is doing that. I already told you guys that I don't want to stand here all day doing this. So now we have a trigger sequencer set up with 4 triggers in 32 steps. So let's now take the output of that and hook it up to that gate input and see what happens. So I'm taking this cable and it's a little too short. So then we go back to what we just did before. Again, we see here a multiple panel, which means that one plug goes in and all these 4 will be connected. And now I'm taking another cable and I take the output of my trigger sequencer. And there we go. Okay, that's the start. Now I want to do something else. I want to add a filter to this sound, and we're going to edit that filter too. So I'm taking the output of my oscillator that is going in here. This is still at this point the only source of audio that we have. The rest is all the rest of the cables that we put in are controlling each other or this module, but this is still the only lead that is audio. So let's now stick this into a filter, signal input, and the filter that I'm using here is the multi-mode filter, also made by Moon. the fantastic company I was just talking to you about. But we'll play with different filters as we put the output back into our mixer, so we could see what the difference in sound is. And then we'll pick the one that we want to use. So this is where we left off. The filters are now all the way down, and I can move it up. And back. We also have resonance. Let's add a good amount of resonance to it. That's cool. Let's try a different filter. Here we have a filter made by Analog Craftsman, also wonderful company. And this filter is more or less the ARP 2600 style. So let's just input, output. Let's see what comes out of this. It has a very sharp cutoff, which is really nice. It has a really good quality to it. And the resonance is very aggressive on this thing. So look what's happening here. If I put the resonance all the way up, it starts making a tone. They call that in the modular world, the filter is self-oscillating, which means the filter is now turning into an oscillator too. So you could use this also as an oscillator to create sounds. Let's see, what other filters do we have? Well, we got a bunch. I want to try this one. This is like from synthesizers.com. This is also a really thick sounding synthesizer. This is the signal input right here, and this is the output. So this thing, if we look over here, which is pretty interesting, is that it allows you to take different outputs. So yes, there is a frequency and there's a resonance, but you could say, you know what, I want this to be a low pass filter. But you could also say, I want this to be a high pass filter. It could also be a notch filter. To be bandpass. All great options. Let's go back to our moon filter. Signal input, signal output. Now this filter has another really interesting feature, that it can actually morph between these different modes that are here switchable. Somewhat comparable to what I just showed you with our original oscillator and the Cobol oscillator, that it can switch between all these different waveforms. This filter can actually very gradually move between all these different filter types. Listen. Pretty interesting. So I want to do something with this filter. Again, I'm not going to be standing here all day doing this. So let's see, what can we do? Well, we have a trigger info coming from our trigger sequencer, but that is a kind of slow trigger. Let's program a trigger here that is twice as fast. So let's take our second trigger sequencer. Let's just take everything up. So we're back at the moon trigger sequencer. Awesome box. So here we see the trigger signal that does the gate for the modulation of the oscillator. Let's make one that is twice as fast that we're going to use for the filter. Let's see if that is any interesting. So I'm actually now taking an extra long cable so I can reach all the way over here. And I'm gonna pick a different envelope generator, and I'm gonna pick the one from Synth. Fantastic company, again, really high quality products. And I'm gonna stick it in its input, and I'm gonna stick this cable in the trigger output and see if something comes in. And if we look over here, we see now that the signal is coming in twice as fast as this one. Now let's take the output of that thing and just stick it in our filter and see what happens. Out of the ADSR envelope generator, and I'm going to stick it in the frequency control input. Here we go. Nothing is happening yet because I need to add it to that frequency. So I'm going to take this thing down and add some information to it. That's pretty cool. What I just did here is, like, if we look over here, is that this is the beautiful thing about this envelope generator. It has a thing that says loop. And with loop, instead of being triggered like this, you could set it to a loop. And now the envelope generator, when it's done with its cycle, it's going to loop itself. And it can go so fast. I've now programmed it so fast that it's now also a C. So now it's controlling the filter, kind of similar what we just did over here with that. So let's just play around a little bit with these parameters. Cool. Let's leave that for right now what it is. Let's do something else. So we're going to keep what that is. We're in, let's see, in C. That's what we just did. So what now if we were to add a chord to it? How would we do that? Because this is all monophonic. Let's just add a chord to it. So let's take our sine wave out, stick it in this mixer, and see what comes out of it. Not that much, because it's set up as an LFO. Let's see. Let's program that as a C. Let's see. Oh. I need to put it, of course, in the tuner. Otherwise, nothing is going to happen. Okay, so now we have another C that we're going to stick into the mixer. And we're going to add our original signal. Okay, not all that interesting, obviously. Let's go like that. Now let's add a G to it. So we're going to create a C minor chord. So let's take another oscillator and put it here. So that is a C, but now let's go up to a G. Okay, this might feel like a C or a G to me, but let's just double check with the tuner. See, I'm a little high. Now we're good. Let's add that to it. Now we have a perfect fifth, but I want the minor on top. So let's go back to another oscillator. Start with the C in the middle. Let's add it to it. That's the G, that's the C, let's just double check. That's a D, let's go a little higher. There we go. D sharp. So now we have C, G, and we have obviously our original bass line. Good. You're wondering why that distortion comes from. It's like the mixer is overdriving at that specific point. So I'm going to take these outputs and stick them in a different mixer. So we have our C here, we have our G here, and we have our E flat here. Okay, and let's stick the output of that mixer into our original mixer number 2. I'm going to turn these puppies up. 1, 2, 3. See if we have sound. And we do. And now I'm going to change actually the waveform. I want this actually to be a pulse. So. This is still not all that interesting, so I'm just wondering what can we do with that? Well, we did a trick here where we also used a pulse wave on our original waveform and we modulated it with something else. So why don't we do something similar over here and make this wave, this chord actually a little more interesting. So I'm just going to switch it open a little bit. Again, I'm going to take another LFO, which means another oscillator. I'm going to set it to low, and again I'm going to stick it into a multiple because this signal needs to go to 3 different oscillators. So I'm just going to take 3 cables that are not too long, stick them in here and in there. It's going to go here. Stick it in there. So now the wave is moving. Let's do something else with it. So we have this output. We could potentially also, let's use a fancy flanger. That's always nice. So let's go back in here. Let's go back there. LFO out. Let's take a shorter cable. Audio in. Output of the mixer. And now, let's see. Why don't we have any sound? Audio out. Here we go. Why is there no sound? Is this cable maybe broken? Which always is an option. Audio out. Oh, wait a second. Something is not happy here. This could be the cable. It happens. It could also be the module. That happens too. Maybe it needs to see the doctor. It looks like it's the module. This is really weird. Well, this is all part of the magic, guys. So I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. Is this working? Audio out. So audio in. Very interesting. What am I potentially doing wrong? Which is always the case. Let's try this filter here to see if I'm not being a total idiot. Oh, I know what it is. I've got a gate set up on my Cubase input, a noise gate. There we go, it's bypassed. I think that's what it was. So let's now go back to our input. Here we go. So let's turn the volume up. Okay, what else could we do? This is an option. I want to stick this in here, and now we're just going to play with the signal a little more. What if this signal were also sequenced? So let's take a slightly longer cable, and we're going to stick it in the output of the phaser. And we're going to take this thing right here, and this thing right here. So this module here, VCA, is actually exactly doing the same as the octal linear VCA that we used before, but I just want to use a couple of different things so you could see. What's interesting here is that it has the original signal, and then it has a signal that it receives from a trigger or something else. So for this exercise, we're going to go back to our trigger sequencer right here, and I'm going to take now one that is 16th notes. So I'm going to add this to a multiple somewhere because the cable is not long enough to reach it all the way over there. This one is very long. And I'm going to stick it in here and then see what happens. There we go. So this thing is now getting sequenced. Good. Now let's use another envelope generator to give that more shape. So I'm going to stick it into here, and then I'm going to take this output and then stick it into this. So now it's very short, super short actually. So, what we have achieved in this episode, I will just sum it up before we move on to another episode next week, is first I showed that you need an oscillator. And the oscillator needs to go to Cubase. I showed very quickly what a multiple is. You put one signal in and you have 4 signals that are copies of that, and you could use it any way you want. That's how I created now a left and a right, so we could actually hear it on both speakers. Then we talked about what if you would make this sound a little more interesting, and we start modulating this oscillator with a different oscillator. And we did that by picking a tone that is actually 2 octaves higher than its original tone, and therefore it started modulating. Then we tried out different filters, and we picked the moon filter, and then on the input of the moon filter we added a gate signal that was once every so many bar counts, and then we created another signal, the chord signal, from 3 different oscillators tuned to C, G, and E flats, that we then mix together in a separate mixer that then goes into a flanger. The flanger goes into a VCA, and that is controlled by a trigger that is 16th notes. So that's actually what we did in this episode. So let's hear the sounds one more time. Even though, you know, this might come across as fairly difficult for some of you, and for others extremely boring because you know way more of it, it's always like a good place to start somewhere. And this is a good place to start, to show you like some basic techniques. I normally work a little different, but that is because I know this system well. So I just wanted to showcase like a couple of modules that are very handy when you're patching your modular sound. And the next episode of modular synthesis, we're gonna sequence like some proper bass lines with the sequences that I have in my system. So I'll see you the next time, and thanks for watching this one. Bye.